A high level here. Look, maybe it wasn't quite a blue wave, but the Democrats taking control of the House is huge. What could that mean for some of the big tech policy issues on the agenda?
Well, I think the way you started out is exactly right. I'm looking to privacy primarily. Net neutrality has obviously been a hot ticket item in the past, but privacy is where Republicans have signaled that they're willing to make a deal. Now, of course, they are still holding the Senate. They've actually extended their lead in the Senate, and Donald Trump is still a Republican last time I checked. Now, interestingly, this morning, he said that he might be willing to work with Democrats to regulate tech companies. That could mean something like antitrust scrutiny, but to me, I heard privacy, so that's really what I'm seeing. And the question that I'm watching is how are the parties going to fight it out? And essentially that means how are the different chambers going to fight it out on how privacy enforcement is essentially done. So that's, I think, really what I'm watching. Then maybe we could turn to broadband infrastructure, net neutrality, antitrust, some of these other issues.
I want to take a closer look at what he had to say about social media companies. Long, heated press conference with the president earlier today. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Believe it or not, I'm one that really likes free speech. A lot of people don't understand that, but I am a big believer. When you start regulating, a lot of bad things can happen. But I would certainly talk to the Democrats if they want to do that, and I think they do want to do that.
Now, the president, some of his associates, like his 2020 campaign manager, have come down hard on Facebook and Twitter and Google for bias. The president has also singled out Amazon. Ryan, read between the lines there. What is the president saying about tech regulation?
Well, I think when it comes to tech, the area of social media is really the one that's going to be most in focus. It is a rare point of bipartisan agreement when it comes to the idea of regulating any kind of industry. And Republicans and Democrats are probably going to come at this from different issues. You have issues pertaining to harassment, election interference, and misinformation. You have data privacy, like we were talking about before. You'll probably be able to find some sort of consensus on these. Who knows what it's going to look like? Who knows how easy it'll be to institute it from a technical perspective? A lot of these companies, especially Facebook, have been already trying to grapple with some of these issues. How do they get some of the content off their platforms? How do they protect data? So on and so forth. So it remains to be seen when any of this will actually take effect, what the regulation is going to look like, what they're going to be required to do that they're not already trying to do right now. But as far as it goes, this is really one area where you have both Democrats and Republicans probably willing to work together.
Now, Ben, as you've reported, some of these tech companies are very active when it comes to lobbying, millions and millions of dollars invested. What have Facebook and Google, what kind of money and causes have they been pushing for?
Right, absolutely. As you say, they're spending millions, and that's something that they've really ramped up in the last year. Just a few years ago, they were doing less than a quarter in some cases of what they're doing now. I think one of the things they're watching very, very closely is antitrust scrutiny. It's important to say here that we don't know of any antitrust case that's out there, but it's something that really scares them. Very often it's something that they want to hold off, throttle it in the cradle, if you will. It's not one of those things that they're willing to just kind of monitor from afar and let it develop. So I've seen a lot of development on antitrust scrutiny. I've seen a lot on net neutrality. I expect to see a lot on privacy. A lot of the trade groups that I work with have come out with privacy principles, been very active taking meetings on the Hill, and I think will be a big part of that discussion going forward, not least of all because they're looking at Europe and they're looking at California and they're seeing that the policy landscape is sort of already set here. And so the question is, can they make inroads here in Washington to get something that's a little more congenial?
Right. Of course, Europe has taken a much harder line on tech companies. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars in fines. We never quite know what President Trump means when he talks about regulation. Amazon is another company, Ryan, that he has honed in on, and especially because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, which President Trump clearly hates. We now have Amazon moving potentially its second headquarters into Northern Virginia in close proximity to the White House. How might that play out?
Well, I don't think there's as much of a regulatory risk to Amazon as there is to, again, some of these social media names. President Trump has talked about maybe changing postal rates or something like that as some sort of punishment, or he discusses sales tax with online retail, things that haven't really been accurate, frankly, and also there doesn't seem to be a ton of appetite within the legislature to make big changes on this. Amazon remains a very popular company with consumers. Probably the worst case scenario for it would be some kind of breakup plan, but I really can't imagine that will gain much traction in either House of Congress.
Ben, President Trump and his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, are tweeting about Facebook and Twitter and bias all the time. How do you imagine those issues might play out leading into 2020, given that, these are the very same companies that could have helped him win the election by their own admission?
Absolutely. And it was so fascinating in that clip that you put up, Emily, that he said that he loves free speech and he is worried about regulating it. That's, of course, a challenge that he would face if he really is going to keep the pressure on some of those bias issues. But, of course, here in Washington, just because you talk about something doesn't mean you actually need to get it done. And if he or Brad Parscale, his campaign manager, decide that it's useful to talk about bias online, if that is firing people up, they have no qualms about doing it, turning people out and getting them to the polls. One of the really amazing things that he did yesterday was to keep some of those low propensity voters who came out seemingly just once for him in 2016 to come out again for him yesterday. If he thinks talking about tech bias is going to do it again, he will not hesitate for a second.
Ryan, several tech stocks rallied after the polls closed. What's behind that?
Well, these are stocks that have been taking a pretty big beating for the past month or so. Facebook is down about a third since its most recent record. Amazon, Google, they all warned on some growth issues last month in their most recent quarterly statements. So they've been under pressure, and just because they're such major market bellwethers, if the market's going to rise, they're probably going to participate with it, if not lead it. But you are seeing a little bit more weakness in some of the social media names. Part of that is you have Match Group, which last night gave a disappointing outlook, which is weighing on some of the social media stocks. It's not the same issues that are impacting Facebook and Twitter, but that's out there too.